Why do you think biotech focuses more on discovery than on manufacturing and scaling?
Well, I mean, discovery is kind of the sexy thing, right?
How do you balance scientific innovation with the business side of fundraising and commercialization?
It's tricky, right? I
Hmm.
think that the best companies and the best innovations really come from kind of slow, methodical growth, right?
Welcome to Life Science Insights Podcast. I'm your host Sandal Karanidhi. Today, I'm excited to welcome Mark Van Zee, CEO and founder of Saku Biosciences, a company focused on transforming how biotech scales discovery, experimentation, and innovation. Today, we'll explore the future of scalable biotech and automation and what it takes to bridge cutting edge science with a real world impact. Mark discovered a critical challenge in biotech. It's not a lack of innovation or R&D, but the inability to scale scientific breakthroughs efficiently. That realization led him to launch Saku Biosciences. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited, really excited to be here.
Can you start by telling us a bit about your background?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of myself as just a scientist. Again, if you go on my LinkedIn, I do have a PhD in bioengineering from UCLA, worked on the core technology for the last decade or so. But my journey in entrepreneurship and life sciences actually started off when I was 9 years old, when I used to make most of my money actually off baseball cards. When I was 9 years old, what I recognized is that if you buy cards in person and sell them on eBay, you can actually sell them on eBay for more than what you can buy them in person. And that kind of got me hooked on a longer entrepreneurial journey that eventually led to me actually building a baseball jersey company when I was 13 years old that I was able to scale to 1.7 million in ARR. That didn't really last forever, but that got me really excited about how can I actually bring products to market and how can I actually build companies that are impactful and people are excited about. The reason why I actually got into life sciences and biotech is that when I was 13, 14 years old, I would sneak into my local college courses over in Claremont. I grew up next to the Claremont McKenna, Pomona College, Pitzer, all those colleges out in Southern California. And what I would do is find the kind of the course catalog and ride my bike to the colleges over there and learn about history, philosophy, innovation, technology, and all these wonderful things. And what I recognized even at that time was that biotech was really going to have its moment during our lifetime, where it was not only going to transform medicine, but products and materials, chemicals, food, and all these other industries that people typically don't associate with biotech and life sciences. And so I really committed my life to figuring out how can we actually bring biotech to the world and make it more impactful than what it is today. I joined a lab at UCLA where I happened to come across a technology that my professor was developing at the time that was designed for directed evolution in order to kind of improve biofuel production. I got really hooked on science and what biomanufacturing means at that point in time.
Hmm.
And I continued that work on that core technology through my undergraduate, PhD, and postdoctoral studies. And that ended up being what I call the PicoShell technology, which is the basis of Saku Biosciences. And we've been building Saku Biosciences for the last couple of years now. Uh, Lots of ups and downs, but we're finally getting to the point where we're now starting to onboard customers. We're now getting some VC checks and getting to this point where now we have the actual scalable company, which has been a really exciting journey because this really started off as a dream when I was 13, 14 years old, and a technology at 20 that was just a drawing on a lab notebook. And so really exciting times, and I'm excited to talk more about what we're working on.
Okay, that's an interesting journey. You often say biotech doesn't have an R&D problem, but a scalability problem. What does that mean? And why is scaling manufacturing so difficult?
Right. And so right now, biotech is very limited by its ability to, one, get products to market fast, and two, get products to market cheaply. The reason why I like talking about this topic is because if you look at where most of the capital and innovation is going right now, it's going into essentially better R&D tools, new discoveries, new biological products. But if you actually go out into industry and you talk to people about where the bottlenecks are, it really is in how do we get products to market faster, cheaper, and how do we make operations more efficient, right?
Mm,
Again, if you talk to, again, a big pharma company, a big industrial biotech company, they don't spend most of their money on R&D and discovery. It's maybe 5 to 10% of their budget. Most of the money is how do we actually commercialize this product, operations, biomanufacturing. And so that's why I like pushing this topic a lot because I think that's where a lot of the money and innovation really needs to go.
mm.
And if we kind of overcome a lot of these efficiencies, it's really what's going to cause the biotech industry to start taking off.
What experiences during your PhD in bioengineering inspired you to start Saku Biosciences?
It's funny, I don't think it actually related to the actual science itself.
Mm,
And it actually related to me just talking to potential customers and people who actually work in the industry.
okay.
Again, I didn't really start off as a scientist. I came in with actually a business mindset coming into
Mm,
it. And one of the things you learn in business is, you don't make a technology and then fit it to some sort of problem. You need to actually work backwards.
mm,
So I did ton of the customer interviews, even at the beginning of my PhD and even undergraduate studies.
okay.
And there was a very critical bottleneck in that biomanufacturing stack
Mm,
that I committed to actually solving.
okay.
And that's actually why it took me so long to develop the technology.
Mm,
Again, it took me about 8 years, was because I decided on the problem that needs to be solved and built a solution towards that versus what's like the simplest technology that I can build to actually graduate with
mm,
or figure out a technology that I can build and then figure out the problem later that's actually going to make money. And
okay.
so that's actually the most valuable part of my PhD, actually.
Okay. Interesting. Many scientists stay in research. Why did you decide to become a founder and CEO instead?
Well, again, I think it really relates to I was always an entrepreneur, and
Okay.
my dream was always to build a biotech company. Now, when I joined the lab, I wasn't expecting that the technology that I was going to develop was going to
Okay.
be the company that I was going to make. The idea was I was going to develop the skill sets to then go ahead and build a biotech company later. But I happened to just kind of get lucky and found out that I kind of stumbled across something that can actually impact a very critical piece of biomanufacturing. And
Mm,
after doing a ton of customer interviews before I started the company, realizing that that's where a lot of the bottleneck in our overall industry actually is. And that's what inspired me to go ahead and build this company.
yeah. It's very important decision in the life to start a company.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I think it, one thing that I don't think people think about when they start a company, right, is like how life encompassing it can be.
Mm, mm,
I think that over the last decade or so, I think there's been kind of this glorification of entrepreneurs.
mm,
Put
mm,
up on stage with these big lights and have all these wonderful social media posts. But if you're really not dedicated to having this be the sole thing that you think about on a day-to-day basis, and it's really not going to be for you. For example, every
it's
lunch
true.
meeting, every breakfast meeting, every lunch, every dinner is basically a meeting for business. I don't really get time to make friends outside of the business aspect of it,
That is true.
right? And and that can be, a turn off for a lot of people, but to me, it was actually very exciting because I think I get this wonderful kind of integration of kind of my life, but also making friends with people that are very passionate about what they work on and passionate about the industry that I'm also passionate in as well.
That's true. I
Mhm.
agree.
Yeah,
For people unfamiliar with the technology, what are PicoShells? Why are they important?
right. So to break it down very simply to someone who's not technical, it's a faster, better way of improving microbes that go into fermentation. To take a little bit of step back and provide context, the next generation of biological products, whether it's in pharma, whether it's in medicine, agriculture, food, they're made using a process called fermentation, where you actually have these microbes such as yeast or bacteria that will make these products in these large tanks called fermenters. If it sounds familiar, it's literally taking beer brewing and adapting that to not just make alcohol, but the next generation of biological products.
Mm.
Now, what PicoShells is not necessarily finding a way to build a better piece of equipment or increase, the overall infrastructure. It's just simply finding a way to improve the microbe or bug that goes into fermentation, such that we can increase overall output in economics using already existing capacity and infrastructure in fermentation.
How does PicoShell technology make cell line development faster and more efficient?
Right. And so there's two parameters that people need to look at, right? Direct gene editing of the microbes that go into fermentation.
Mm.
Now, that's very inefficient because figuring out which genes to edit or to improve manufacturing output is incredibly difficult to identify and actually do. And so there's this concept called directed evolution that allows us to essentially work backwards, where instead of picking the gene I edit to improve manufacturing output, I work backwards, where I introduce random mutations and find a way to pick out the best producer,
Mm.
right? That concept revolutionized protein engineering and
Mm.
resulted in the Nobel Prize of Francis Arnold out of Caltech, and is actually driving the data sets that are going to machine learning now. That's revolutionizing the protein design space for therapeutics and enzymes. Now, that concept of directed evolution will also revolutionize strain engineering and microbial engineering for fermentation, but there has not been a tool to do that effectively
Mm.
until PicoShells. I think PicoShells will enable direct evolution and eventually generate the key data sets that will go into machine learning that will allow us to massively accelerate our ability to improve the microbes that go into fermentation. Now, there's two key parts of this. One is the throughput.
Mm.
Essentially, how many mutations can you actually explore before you find kind of the best one?
Mm.
A lot of these other technologies, let's say like weld plates, require these huge rooms full of all these robotics to actually find like and look through maybe like 100,000 different variants
Mm.
and isolate the best one.
Okay.
What PicoShells did was condense that room of robotics into
Mm.
essentially a bench where you need some pumps, a little chip about this size,
Mm.
and a box called a flow cytometer,
Mm. Mm.
where using that level of footprint, you can now actually explore millions of different mutants versus 100,000s that you would normally explore in an entire room full of robotics. Now, the second key innovation that's important is this concept called you get what you screen for. In the past, what people would do is pick out microbes that would really work well in the lab.
Okay.
You try to go to the commercial world and it doesn't necessarily translate or work very well. If you wanted to break down the key innovation at PicoShells, it essentially eliminates that translation issue.
Mm.
Whereas picking out how well a microbe behaves in the lab, it's how well does this microbe behave in a fermentation commercial setting. And because of that, we can really reduce the timelines to improve these microbes for fermentation. And I think it'll be really impactful for the entire biomanufacturing stack in the future.
How much impact can better performing producer cells have on biomanufacturing cost and output?
I think it's incredibly impactful. I
Okay.
definitely think that there are other parts that need to be solved, feedstock processing, downstream processing.
Mm.
But I think one thing I want to kind of highlight here is I think that the industry has moved away from emphasizing the importance of the underlying strain or cell line that goes into manufacturing.
Mm.
I think that if you look at a lot of innovators, they're kind of hyper focused on essentially downstream processing right now.
Mm.
But if you talk to people who are actually building the facilities, who are actually running CDMOs, they still say that the underlying cell line and microbe is still fairly important to the overall workflow.
Mm.
And that is mainly because one, it controls the maximum potential output that is achievable
Mm.
when you start scaling up. And two, it controls the underlying feedstocks or food that goes input into these manufacturing workflows.
Okay.
If you kind of analyze where the industry is going,
Mm.
it really has to relate to how do we use more local and cheaper inputs that go into manufacturing. And
Okay.
that's ultimately going to be determined by the underlying microbe that goes into these systems.
What matters most to biopharma companies when they evaluate platform like Saku Biosciences? Is it speed, cost, quality, or flexibility?
Speed.
Okay.
The number one thing that biopharma companies are worried about when they get to manufacturing
Mm,
is how do I get to this product to clinical trials faster? And so that's actually why it can be hard and difficult to actually apply new innovations into that workflow.
mm,
It's because they've condensed and optimized the time to go from I want to get a product to clinical trials
mm.
to actually get to clinical trials so much that if you introduce a new innovation, it better work and it better work right away. And you better have evidence that it's going to reduce the timeline to actually get there.
Do you think automation and advanced screening can finally remove the bottleneck in the cell line development?
I think that it's going to be massively impactful.
Okay.
And I think it's, again, the big bottleneck right now compared to using something like CRISPR gene editing.
Mm,
And I think it's going to be massively impactful in our ability to speed up cell line development and strain engineering.
mm,
Now, I think where, honestly, where it's going to get really crazy is when I think you start introducing these machine learning tools.
mm.
I know like AI is like kind of the hype buzzword that everyone talks about,
Yes.
but when you really kind of deep look into what this is going to look like in the future, it's really going to be computational editing that's going to finally actually remove that bottleneck of cell line development.
How can modern biomanufacturing help make supply chains stronger and less dependent on global disruptions?
Yeah, I think this is where this topic becomes incredibly interesting because I think that people who think about biotech and biomanufacturing aren't thinking big enough.
Mm, mm, mm,
I think that people limit their scope of biomanufacturing to just making biological products and making biological innovation.
mm.
Where I see biomanufacturing impacting all of manufacturing for all chemicals and products. And the reason why I think this is you do have a lot of global supply chains that are breaking down right now
Okay.
due to the tariffs, geopolitical disruptions, the wars that are happening right now. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have these centralized facilities
Mm,
and single sources of feedstocks and inputs that are very fragile. And if you have a war that breaks out and you have that one supply chain or what that one source of feedstock
okay.
break down, that's going to disrupt the entire supply chain,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And the unique thing about biotech is that you're not just limited to one type of input or one type of feedstock.
mm, mm.
You can place manufacturing wherever you want. And so instead of say like relying on, sugar from Brazil or some petroleum chemicals from like the Ukraine or Russia or the Middle East,
Mm.
you can actually start using more local and regional feedstocks to make the same products that we all know and love. So, for example, how can we use the almond hull waste in California instead of oil inputs to make key chemicals and materials?
Mm,
How can we
mm.
use lignocellulose from trees out in like North Carolina to feed into these biomanufacturing workflows to make these critical materials?
Okay.
And I think that's where things get really exciting because what ends up happening is that you have more regional manufacturing overall that is not going, again, not only going to impact biological manufacturing, but manufacturing overall.
Okay. But how important are alternative feedstocks for reducing the cost and improving the sustainability in biotech?
I think very important. I think right now people only think about it from like a COGS perspective.
Okay.
Like there's like the pure costs of actually, making these products that go into fermentation or biomanufacturing, right?
Mm, mm,
But as I kind of mentioned, the problem with a lot of these feedstocks that are sourced globally is that you have these hidden supply or these hidden costs that come up when they get disrupted, right?
mm,
So for example, we were at a major corporation, major chemical corporation,
mm,
and we're talking to an employee at that corporation who had worked there for about 20 years.
mm, mm,
And we asked him, do you like working here?
mm,
And he said, well, the first 15 years I really liked it here, but the last 5 years I haven't.
mm,
And why? And what he said was when that Nord Stream pipeline blew up in Ukraine,
mm,
they had to completely rethink their operations because that completely disrupted their ability to make critical materials,
Mm,
right? And instead of thinking on 10-year timeframes, they thought on 1 to 2 year timeframes.
mm,
And again, to kind of loop around back to this feedstock problem, what people see biotech doing is essentially as a way to have, again, these more regional feedstocks that can eliminate these really costly disruptions that can really happen.
mm,
And so it's no longer kind of a COGS thing. It's how do we remove a lot of the price volatility and disruptions
mm,
and the costs associated with that to make our
mm.
supply chains more resilient and stable.
Downstream processing is very expensive. Can better cell engineering help reduce purification cost?
I think to a certain extent, I think that from a conceptual perspective,
Okay.
if you used a microbe that had more higher purity and less impurity,
Mm,
it can definitely impact downstream processing costs. Now, I think the trick to doing that, though, is moving away from the commonly used organisms that go into manufacturing,
mm, mm,
which Cho, Heck, Pichia, Bacillus. I think the challenge right now is I think there's an unwillingness for people to move away from the commonly used organisms to go
mm,
into
mm,
manufacturing.
mm,
And so, well, I think in concept, yes, but I think in order for it to really start impacting downstream processing, we need to move away from the commonly used organisms in order to do that.
Why do you think biotech focuses more on discovery than on manufacturing and scaling?
Well, I mean, discovery is kind of the sexy thing, right? It's like, hey, I discovered this.
Yes, that's
Yeah, I
true.
found this, and it became this billion-dollar company.
Billion-dollar company, and with all the PR, it comes in the limelight, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think that, when you're talking about improving manufacturing and operations, it's about, okay, well, how do I make things faster, cheaper, better, right?
Mm, mm,
It's very boring to actually build a company that focuses on that. And I think that's ultimately why people like doing R&D because it's just, again, more exciting. I think you have this inbuilt ecosystem in biotech where most of the innovation comes out of academia,
mm,
which is very naturally R&D heavy,
mm,
and they never actually get exposed to anything that happens afterwards. I think people in academia think, oh, I discovered this thing, and then
mm,
I hand it over to some people who manufacture and do business, and then they'll just take it from there,
mm.
right? And so to kind of think about this a little bit more, I do think is also kind of a little bit of an education problem, right? Hey,
Yes.
there's a lot more to building a biotech company and getting a product to market than
Mm.
simply discovering something new.
How do you balance scientific innovation with the business side of fundraising and commercialization?
It's tricky, right? I
Mm,
think that the best companies and the best innovations really come from kind of slow, methodical growth, right?
mm,
But to your point, you do have these very short timelines and very like limited funding sources
mm,
that force you to kind of iterate very quickly.
mm, mm,
So the way I kind of think about it is have this long-term vision of where you want to go with the company,
mm,
but at the same time, you should only really be focusing on what the next step is.
mm, mm,
I
mm,
think that too many people, I think, make these like really extensive plans of how to get there.
mm,
And I, to an extent, do that as well, but with the caveat of I just need to make sure the next step works, and then
mm,
everything else is kind of wavering or not. It can change at a moment's notice,
mm,
right?
mm. What have been the biggest challenges in building Saku Biosciences so far?
The business model. I think that order to build a platform technology in biotech,
Mm,
problem is actually not the technologies that are
mm,
being developed.
mm,
It's actually the process of actually building a scalable company that generates recurring revenue.
mm, mm,
If you look at a lot of people who've tried to develop screening technologies or businesses focused on cell line development and strain engineering,
mm,
they've all, struggled and failed, right?
mm, mm,
Uh, I think you have, Ginkgo Bioworks and Zymergen are good
mm,
examples of this. But at the same time, you have a company like Berkeley Lights, which quote unquote failed as a company.
mm,
But if you actually talk to a lot of people in the cell line development industry,
mm,
they actually use the Beacon platform quite a bit and actually
mm,
love the technology.
mm, mm,
And so really at Saku, it's figuring out how do we build the technology that's going to revolutionize this part of the stack,
mm,
but is also going to create scalable revenue that will allow us to grow as a company.
mm, mm,
And the way we've kind of broken it down is how do we generate recurring revenue
mm,
of an off from an off-the-shelf product
mm,
that is not a royalty,
mm,
right? I think a lot of companies in the past who have made straight engineering companies have tried to get that recurring revenue from royalties, but people really don't want that.
mm,
On top of that, the timelines to actually get those royalties are really long. And
mm,
so you're going to be kind of twiddling your fingers hoping that they're going to make it.
mm,
And so at Saku, what we're trying to do is, again, figuring out a way to make some sort of off-the-shelf product using the PicoShell technology that generates some sort of substantial recurring revenue on the back end
mm.
that's near term and not a royalty. And I think once Saku breaks that code,
Okay.
I think it'll be a massively successful business.
What makes a biotech platform truly scalable in the real world?
Are we talking about technologies or companies?
In terms of technology.
Technology, I think it's a little bit of a paradox. I think that technologies of biotech are incredibly difficult to scale,
Okay.
right? Just generally, right? I think that that's why I think the industry has struggled to scale
Mm,
because at a fundamental level, it doesn't scale,
mm,
right? And so thinking about how to build a company that is scalable when oftentimes the technologies are not
mm,
is an interesting paradox that needs to be
mm,
solved,
mm.
frankly. And I think once biotech starts to solve that issue, I think you're going to see a lot more capital flow into the industry. I
Okay.
think a lot more innovation start to happen.
Mm,
And unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. And that is one of the key tenets at Saku is, again, how do we actually make a scalable business using an unscalable technology?
mm. Beyond healthcare, which industries do you think will benefit most from scalable biology in the future?
I think it's going to be food. And I think that that is the next industry that's really going to pop off
Mm,
because it really has a lot of the parallels to the GLP-1 revolution that's happening right now.
mm,
You think about GLP-1, like why did it have a Super Bowl commercial, a couple months ago?
mm,
It's because you had this new technology, right, that
mm,
solved a solution that no one was able to solve before,
mm,
and you had this almost influencer layer that really drove that to be a very popular product for a lot of people.
mm, mm, mm,
I think a lot of problems in a lot of the other materials and chemical industries with biotech is that there's no mechanism to generate some sort of emotional response to
mm,
get people to almost overpay to overcome the current costs with a lot of these products, right? You think about people who want to make biofuels. At the end of the day, does it power my car? And how cheap is it, right?
mm, mm,
And if you think about all the industries today, which is the one that's which is the one that has the biggest emotional response for people? And
mm,
that's you think about it as part of people's culture. People go to these Michelin star restaurants and overpay for, very, very small quantities. And I think if kind of the food market can figure out a way to make something go viral and get very popular with that influencer layer that's already built within that food market,
mm,
I think that's going to really start to take off. And I don't know what it's going to be, but just looking at the landscape, I think that's the one that's going to take off. And I think you're going to start to see a lot of downstream effects where a lot of capital is going to be going into how do you make biomanufacturing and fermentation cheaper to make these products,
mm.
which will then start impacting materials, chemicals, and all these other industries that biotech can really impact.
If you could change one thing about the biotech ecosystem, what would it be?
This is going to sound really complex. It's the liquidity of companies.
Mm,
And the reason why I say this is because it relates to a larger issue in the industry, which is essentially the sources of funding.
mm,
And I think a lot of entrepreneurs kind of blame investors, right, for what gets funded, was does not get funded. And I think entrepreneurs need to realize that investors are beholden to a system that's very limited in their ability to kind of get their money back,
mm,
right? There are two ways investors get their money back.
mm,
It's an exit via acquisition or an IPO.
Mm,
Now, there are very, very, very few companies that are really designed to do that. And so what ends up happening is that funding doesn't get fully distributed to all companies that can really grow the industry. It goes to a very small subset of companies that are quote unquote investable, right?
mm,
And I think if you solve the liquidity issue of companies, which is essentially how do we create the ability for investors to get their money back sooner and on demand?
mm,
I think that opens up the ability for people to invest in companies that aren't designed to make 1,000x returns in,
mm,
5 years, right? But ones that make 2x in a year,
mm,
right? Like services companies, tools companies, companies that are very critical to us actually growing the industry,
mm.
not just making a lot of money at the end of the day.
So, looking ahead 10 years, what impact do you hope Saku Biosciences will have on the medicine, food, and manufacturing?
So what I hope is that it becomes the foundation to scaling all of biomanufacturing across the globe,
Mm,
right? I think that if we solve the scalability issue in biomanufacturing, that will unlock the entire biotech industry
mm.
and create this revolution that I think a lot of people have been seeing come for a very, very long time.
Thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. It was truly an interesting and insightful discussion. And thank you again for your time and sharing your expertise with us.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. It was really excited to talk about what we do and happy to come back anytime.